becoming a standard beginning to these videos now, isn't it? You can guess what I'm going to say next. Feet on the floor. Bottom on the chair, listen and look. And what happens? Well, if we really put it into practice, we'll almost invariably find a sense of space. And in that space, a sense of stillness, which really we could call presence. And strangely enough, with that sense of presence comes a reassurance. It's almost as though an invisible hand is holding me. Now, one of the old-fashioned words for God, you don't often hear it these days, is providence. That which provides. One of the first towns they founded and named in the early settlers in America, the Pilgrim Fathers, they called it Providence. It's in Massachusetts, isn't it? Providence. Well, they must have had that feeling. They'd come across the Atlantic, survived a winter. At this particular moment, that providence somehow seems more relevant, doesn't it? That spiritual comfort, that feeling of sufficiency, confronted by an ocean of problems, that one thing is certain, isn't it? Absolutely certain. Infallible. So when the good book says, trust in the Lord, it makes sense, doesn't it? Put not your trust in princes, neither in any child of man. Well, I suspect money is one of those children of men, isn't it? Well, I've never made much money in my life, but rather amazingly, I seem to have been provided. I can tell you as a farmer, you don't make much money out of growing organic carrots, even selling them in London. I believe there's another verse in the Bible. It's not actually, it's often quoted as money is the root of all evil. I believe it's love of money is the root of all evil. I think that's correct. Well, love of, in other words, attachment to, identification with. As Jesus says, take no thought for the morrow, what ye shall eat, what ye shall drink, neither for the body wherewith it shall be clothed, but seek ye first the kingdom of God. And that, in my present understanding, is this presence of spirit, that which is here now. Seek first that, and then all else will be added unto you. Wow, what a thing to say. If one could really believe that and trust in it. Can it really be so? Well, I'll give you another little example of that. I became a cook, and do you know, I've never earned so much money in my life. I was driving along in a state of near despair, and I came to a gas station, a little cafe and gas station, and there was a sign there saying, cook wanted. Well, I went in. There were a nice couple of elderly people there. And, well, I'd never been a cook, of course. I was a farmer. I couldn't believe it. $10 an hour or something. At the end of the day, I had, no, a bit less than that. I can't remember. Anyway, a pocket full of dollars. Doing pancakes and things, and taking things out of the fridge and putting them on the hot plate, and it wasn't very difficult. No, I didn't know how to. Americans do funny things with eggs, different to me. I had to learn how to flip them out of a frying pan against a wall that was all covered in grease, of course, where all the fat was spilled out of the frying pan. And eventually I learned how to do it. I was quite good at it, because they like their eggs done like that. Anyway, I stayed there some months, and I earned enough money to hire another car. And when my time was up, the couple there, they had a holiday home, I think on, was it Lake Tahoe, where they dammed the Colorado River, and there was a car hire firm in Las Vegas. If you can imagine a place less like me than Las Vegas, I went there and got the hell out of it as quickly as I could. And I spent my first night sleeping under the stars in the desert outside Las Vegas. I looked up at those blessed stars and felt the cold night wind on my face. I thought, ah, oh, freedom. I'm back where I belong. So money, yes, it's an extraordinary thing. Doors open. And then I went to Russia, and of course I'd never been a teacher before. I knew nothing about children. I never had any, and just because I spoke English. And the only Englishman in this little place where I was, and they were wanting to learn English, so I found myself teaching. And of course I had never earned much at that, but it was enough to pay my way. Well, if we come back into this oneness, you see, this ever-present presence, what happens to the goods and bads of life? In that oneness, when we look at life from that one point of view, one of the things that happens is we don't judge. You don't sort of, perhaps because you're at one yourself, there's no need to separate life. You see life more as a whole. It really does. So much depends on your point of view. There's a simple example. If you're standing at the bottom of a mountain, you can't see very far, and there seem innumerable choices. You probably wonder whether to climb it or not. Life's full of choices. When you go up to the top of a mountain, and you just look down and see the world down there, it seems simpler, doesn't it? Of course, you may carry your luggage, your mental luggage with you, your problems with you. We tend to do this. But usually, in the process of going up the mountain, we let go at least some of the burden. There's usually a sense of relief. Good and bad, black and white. They say as you get older, you don't see the world so much in terms of black and white, but different shades of grey. Jesus also gives us the examples of of the animals, the birds, they toil not, neither do they spin. I think that's the flowers of the field, is it? Anyway, whatever, all nature, you see. Nature is provided for, isn't it, marvellously? Who feeds the birds? Who causes the grass to grow in spring? Looking back on life, I suppose it was never my priority, and I never gave much attention to it, really, but in a strange way I do seem to have been provided in the most remarkable way, not only with money, but with everything else needed for life. You really wonder who's lived my life. I'm not sure that I have at all, really. Who's this speaking now? I hardly know. For many years, in my early years of my farming, I bought almost nothing. I just lived on what the farm produced. I had a big black pot. There was an open fire there, and I had a big black pot on the open fire. I'd boil beans. I'd boil several days' supply of beans. They got it sort of thicker and thicker soup. And I made my own bread, grew my own wheat, ground it. And many a meal I just had bread and this bean stew. And thought I lived like a king. I think it goes back a long, long time in my life, actually. Very many years to when I was quite a young man, I think. I just felt dissatisfied with not only the conversation of this world, but the sort of providing of this world, excess food, excess everything, the so-called entertainment, the interest of this world never really satisfied me. So I think sort of instinctively I just always drew back into silence, and very often into solitude, which for me has never been empty. It's never been an absence of the good things of life, but the fullness. I don't think I would have used the word spirit as a younger man, but somehow I just felt at home there, compared to comparatively didn't feel at home in the world. I've just finished editing my next book, describing several months I spent in Africa, when I was lucky enough to spend much of the time in the desert. And I so fell in love, well, before I even got to the desert, with the great spaces of Africa. I was never interested in going to the cities or towns. I always went to the empty places on the map, took the smallest roads, and just, I did love that space, the silence, those great spaces. I felt immediately at home there, expanded into a greater reality, in which the frivolity of this world just sort of dropped away. That was the last thing I wanted. And then on the few occasions when, after spending weeks alone in the desert, I came back into some sort of so-called civilized situation, and talking just drove me nuts then. And after a couple of days talking, I remember I made these notes in my notes, how I longed to be back in the desert again. There's an expression, is that you get fed up with it. Exactly what happened to me after a day or two of human contact and too much eating and talking. I just got fed up with it. I just wanted to be back under the stars again. And this really has evolved into what I now call this ever-present presence, this stillness, where I feel a completion that I never do in the world of words and talking. And you're always sort of swapping bits of incompletion, aren't you? Questions and things where there's really no answer. When you find this depth, then you're beyond question. There aren't any questions there because it's so obvious. It's just beyond question, beyond doubt. And it offers a completement, a fulfillment which we just never find in the dancing among the shadows of this world, which is what it is really. And when you become as acquainted with it as I'm blessed to be now, it becomes ever clearer that well, I said dancing shadows is just what it is. The dancing shadows of this world are just insubstantial. That's a good way of describing it. See, this presence is substantial. It's like the air that fills balloons. If you think of our body, those of you that have been lucky enough to see someone die and spend some time contemplating a corpse soon after death, you'll more than likely have noticed that something goes out of the body. It really is like the air goes out of a balloon, and the body that's left behind, that goes into the earth and the grave, really is not the person, is it? So what happens to the person? Well, this is what's called the soul. I remember particularly clearly with my mother and my father that what's left is still the person, but invisible. You go from visibility and sort of embodiment into the freedom of spirit. So this is really the substance that fills the balloons of what we call the flesh. And at death, which is really liberation, the substance goes out, and the empty, just like a bit of shriveled up rubber. The balloon, the body, the flesh, just disintegrates back into the earth. Yes, that's why these sort of questions about, well, one's reactions to the world, yes, they have their place, but somehow they rather melt away before the greater reality of this ever-presence. I spent a Christmas in a cave, totally alone, in the Namibian desert. I don't think I've ever been so happy in my life. And I remember thinking of Christmas, far, far away, 10,000 miles away, there were people celebrating Christmas, all the tinsel and few dry biscuits and water. I was meditating there one day, early one morning it was, I think, and to my absolute joy, do you know what happened? A little fox, a little desert fox. Well, my eyes were closed and I heard a little patter of feet. I opened my eyes and there was this little fox sniffing at me. I didn't dare move, and he sniffed around and pattered away. And then next evening, or the day after, he came again. I was thrilled. I couldn't think anything in the whole wide world could have filled me with such total joy. That was such a wonderfully clear demonstration to me of the total provision, the total providence of nothing. That's it. Because that's the desert experience. You see, the world, particularly if, as happened to me, I was sort of prepared for it by weeks of ever greater space and solitude. In a sense, the world gets further and further away, and it's in nothing that we find everything. This is really the great mystical experience. That the everything is nothing, the more and more of less and less. Here you are, this is the real answer to money, isn't it? And it's in the nothing that you discover everything. And of course that isn't bits of metal in your pocket that you may find have enough. I'm sure you will get enough. but the abundance of this real life, the spiritual fulfillment, is so great that any sort of worldly lack is inconceivable.